This list of games is interesting. Many of you will recognise it as a list of titles that have recently fallen out of print, in the USA at least. There is definitely a big mix here though, from the underloved Fire Emblem Engaged and the slightly forgotten Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, to surefire sellers like Nintendo Switch Sports and New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, and even absolute classics like Super Mario Odyssey and Zelda Link's Awakening. Why would Nintendo not put more of these titles out, given that they have proven to sell well? Is there a Switch Selects plan? Are these being saved for a Switch 2 Second Wind, or are they about to press start on a different plan entirely? Settle in for another Nintendo forecast as we deep dive Nintendo's missing titles. The first and perhaps most major reason they might be holding back these games is a simple problem: cost versus reward. Manufacturing isn't cheap, and manufacturing small runs is particularly problematic. In a recent Kit and Krista podcast, former Nintendo employee Krista Yang mentioned, "We heard about the manufacturing woes at Nintendo a lot, and I can well believe it. Production is always expensive, but when you have a new title that you can expect to shift tens of thousands and hopefully hundreds of thousands or millions in very short order, it's worth ramping up production. And also, standing costs like storage are low. But the Switch's library is now so vast that there's a real risk producing more of one game will just rob sales from a different title. If Link's Awakening goes up in sales but Skyward Sword goes down because any stragglers looking for a Zelda game choose differently, that doesn't actually have any net positive in terms of sales for Nintendo. In fact, the opposite is true, because reprinting those cartridges was more expensive than clearing their Skyward Sword inventory. Now, you might say that this can't be right because of the presence of a couple of very reliable monster sellers here. New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, Super Mario Odyssey, and Nintendo Switch Sports are all true evergreens for the company, selling early and often. However, if players are dedicated enough to want to buy them, they can still offer them digitally to customers, especially if Nintendo are offering them as pack-in options for new system releases. Digital codes are great for Nintendo, of course, because they don't need to share profit with the retailers, and nor do they have restocking fees. I think the cost-reward ratio not being sufficiently tempting for Nintendo is a major part of this missing game puzzle, but it's not necessarily the only part. Another reason is deliberate scarcity. Think about it. With many titles, you know that waiting is a safe bet because they will drop in price. I loved Mario + Rabbids Kingdom Battle, but held out for Sparks of Hope because I knew, and I was right, that Ubisoft would drop the price through the floor soon after launch. Nintendo never does this, but the ultimate expression of this is allowing some games to go out of stock rather than offering them at a lower price. For anyone on the fence about buying a title, it's the best way to subtly but powerfully communicate the message: if you want this game, do not sleep on it. However, there are more angles to scarcity to consider. We know that Nintendo often does like to have multiple editions of the same game available at once. They advised Ubisoft that Sparks of Hope might be better released on the next system, as they tend to have one per console as their approach. Ubisoft didn't listen, and they regretted it. However, a glance through this list of titles shows that many of these do have newer editions, or will do very shortly, and so the games will be superseded by newer entries in the same series. For example, the Origami King will soon be replaced by the Thousand Year Door, New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe has been replaced by Super Mario Bros. Wonder, and who knows, perhaps there will be another Donkey Kong to replace Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze before too long. But there are other options besides. Let's consider the possibility that many have inferred from this news, that these titles are being saved as the spine of a Nintendo Selects line. The Selects line's predecessor, Player Choice, was introduced in 1996, late in the Super Nintendo's lifespan, and it would have been late for the Game Boys as well, had the original Pokemon games not scored it another couple of years. Still, it seems very, very late in the Switch's life cycle to start trying to shift large numbers of these old titles when they're soon going to be trying to graduate people over to newer hardware. You wouldn't expect these re-releases to sell at the same clip as existing releases, so you have a lot of problems that are caused by keeping these titles around, issues around inventory taking up space. The Selects line also completely undercuts the perception of value Nintendo has worked so hard to cultivate. Still, it could be worth it for them. They might be able to ameliorate the higher production costs of putting out a limited run of titles by releasing a dozen or more at once, and they may look at it as a way to bunch smaller titles together in such a way that serves as an advertisement in itself, and as a kind of victory lap for the console. Instead of one 12 million selling title for Christmas, they might be hoping for 12 titles which could collectively average 1 million each, and while they'd be taking a haircut on the price, none of these games would have additional development costs, so it would still be a financially sound move for the company. I previously identified the odds of a select line as no more than a 30% chance, and while I'm not yet willing to tip it any lower to a 10% chance, I certainly don't think the likelihoods have improved. For one thing, recent investigations highlighted on the Nintendo Prime channel demonstrate that they are doing quiet, limited cutting of game prices anyway without waiting for a select line, and this certainly gives them much more control over the price drops they offer, as they can raise and lower the price more strategically in response to their supply and consumer demand. But what if they didn't drop the price and just reprinted these games with new packaging? What if they issued some of them as limited edition physical reprints? Scarcity has its own attraction after all. They did this in 2020 with the Super Mario 3D All-Stars game, and although it opened the door to a lot of controversy at the time, enough editions were printed that the 3D All-Stars game was readily available for a fair time after launch. In this case, it's only the physical versions that will be limited edition, as the games would continue to be available on the eShop. Given these titles are so popular, I could definitely see them branding them as back by popular demand, and again, by daisy-chaining these games together, you pool advertising and production costs to some degree. I'm not sure they'd be quite this bold, but it still stands out as one possibility. More possibilities to rule out though. I don't think they will release any complete edition or director's cut packages on Switch incorporating DLC. Yes, it's true that there are many Switch games which could benefit from DLC, and some on this list, like Xenoblade Chronicles 2, do have DLC and could be bundled together, but there is one simple reason holding them back. Of the games that already have DLC, they have substantial file sizes already. If you bundled Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and Torn of the Golden Country, you'd be looking at needing a much higher capacity game card, which would of course be more costly. Maybe they could get away with charging $70 for a game plus DLC release if they did something special with the box, but most of the hardcore fans already own the game, and anyone seeing the series for the first time has Definitive Editions or Xenoblade Chronicles 3 to try, so it's hard to see that from Nintendo's point of view, the juice would be worth a squeeze. Same with Three Houses, same with Fire Emblem Engage, which didn't exactly light the world on fire to begin with. There is on this list one surprising exception which could benefit from a special edition incorporating DLC, and one exception only I think, but I'll get to that later in the video. Another oft speculated possibility is that these are being saved for new editions on the next Switch console. To which I say, have you looked at these games? There are some great titles I love, but individually few, if any, would make particularly opportune ports for a whole variety of reasons. A classic example is Paper Mario The Origami King, a game that is being superseded by a new Paper Mario, well, okay, an old one, in the Thousand Year Door, although it's being marketed as new, so I'm sure Nintendo doesn't want The Origami King competing with Thousand Year Door at this point. While Origami King's reception wasn't as frigid as Color Splash, it was still quite temperate, and given Paper Mario's relatively low sales numbers, what's the benefit to resurrecting a middling title, sales-wise at least, when they have a newer one to push? Falling into this category also are Pikmin 3 Deluxe, which has been replaced by Pikmin 4, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, Fire Emblem Three Houses, WarioWare Get It Together, Kirby Star Allies, and Splatoon 2. And in the case of Splatoon 2, they especially don't want to split the player base down any further. Just as with the recent closure of the original Splatoon, they will eventually want to graduate people from Splatoon 2 onto the newer edition or editions. Also, while it might seem callous to put Xenoblade Chronicles 2 on this list, a game rich in story that links to the other titles in the series, given that we got a 10-year anniversary re-release of the original Xenoblade Chronicles, despite the 3DS port having already released as well, I think there is a decent chance at least that we will see a definitive edition of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 in the lifespan of the next console. I'd put this at a 30% prior to the end of 2028, with the question mark being chiefly of whether the priority would go to reviving the more obscure Xenoblade Chronicles X instead. There are more games which could fit into the category of having replacement titles already lined up. Yoshi's Crafted World especially stands out. In particular, Woolly World was a Wii U title, and so would be a relatively swift port to Switch, and it was far better regarded than Crafted World ever was. Granted, it already has a 3DS version as well, but this perhaps makes support even more beneficial as they could cudgel in the 3DS Poochie content in a new, higher resolution form, especially since Goodfeel have wrapped work on Princess Peach Showtime and their independent project as well, meaning they could have time to work on a simpler port with a shorter development cycle. Besides, already featuring on the 3DS was not a problem for Xenoblade Chronicles. I think Woolly World on Switch has to be a 30% chance, although I'm not going to set a time frame, as I could imagine that this could be released well into the lifespan of the next system to round things off, much like Kirby's Epic Yarn was a bow-out title for the Nintendo 3DS back in 2019. I suspect that bigger plans are afoot for Donkey Kong, with the Magnificent Ape the focus of the new theme park attraction, as well as having a significant role in the Super Mario Bros. Movie. Also, Nintendo likes sometimes to do some warm-up marketing by releasing smaller games on a prior console. Remember Metroid Samus Returns and Luigi's Mansion 1 on the aging 3DS before the new console's reveal. So, if the next system will have the long-rumoured and much hoped-for new major DK title, a Donkey Kong Country Returns up-res port from the same sub-team at Retro that brought us the Switch version of Tropical Freeze could be a smart move. And, if not the retro classic, Jungle Beat is also out there, and while I don't know if we can give any credit to the rumours that the Super Mario Odyssey devs at Tokyo have been working on a new Donkey Kong game themselves, if they were to have lent people to any effort, it's far from impossible that it could have been a Donkey Kong title based on their previous game. Donkey Kong Jungle Beat plus K. Rool's Fury, anyone? Okay, I think the Japanese team are likely to leave K. Rool alone, but who knows? His appearance in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate might have ignited something in the hearts of younger developers at the Tokyo studio. In whichever form it takes, I think some kind of Donkey Kong title is a 30% chance to release on Switch before it ends its life. And in this case, I think the odds would probably become more remote the further on we get, because once a new system is released, they will want to push DK primarily on that. Metroid Dread is another game that seems to have fallen out of print, and I don't think another Mercury Steam Metroid is especially likely to hit Switch, although if it were a smaller title, say a remake of Super Metroid, the timing would work. It has been nearly 3 years since Metroid Dread released, and there were rumours at the time that the game had been completed for a while after all. That said, Metroid fans have been eating very well lately with Dread, Prime Remastered, and the surely soon to finally drop Metroid Prime 4, so I don't expect yet another title to launch until the new console is ready. After all, the small but intense Metroid fanbase are unlikely to have slept on this title, and I can't imagine the regular sales trickle they get is enormously high. After all, releasing Samus Returns late in the console's life cycle did not benefit that game particularly, and I could definitely see the next Metroid game being a graphical powerhouse which would benefit from the new system's technology. Fire Emblem Engage is a surprising one on this list given how recent it is, but another Fire Emblem title has long been rumoured, so removing Engage quickly from the market might be sensible. If anything, the fact that it sold out so quickly suggests that it was always intended to be a relatively low-selling title, and that they estimated, based on the relatively low sales of late-stage 3DS Fire Emblems, a number they could sell to appeal to that core Fire Emblem base, without going over the top. I have a separate video exploring Fire Emblem devs' intelligent systems and looking at more detail at this possibility, so please check it out at the link at the top of the screen. As for Link's Awakening, it's kind of painful to me that this title is out of print, as it is an absolutely beautiful new version of one of my all-time favourite titles. But is this a sign of a new 2D Zelda on the cards? A Link Between Worlds port, for example, or even Four Swords or a Triforce Heroes game? Even if not in 2D, there is a good range of Zelda on the console now, with 2 Hyrule Warriors titles out, 2 Wild titles, Skyward Sword, Cadence of Hyrule, and very likely some kind of new Zelda coming before the new console emerges. I think Nintendo may feel that they're better off focusing on newer titles, and while it might seem a shame if Link's Awakening goes away, the Zelda games especially seem to operate on a cyclical basis. Link's Awakening has already had 2 remakes in its life, and while it's too far into the future to forecast, it would not astonish me if 10 years from now a remaster of Link's Awakening hits the Switch 3 or whatever that system will be called. This leaves a small core of titles that are more puzzling for being out of print already. Mario Strikers Battle League was disappointing, but I still love the core mechanics. As with Engage, it seems like Nintendo really sent it out to die with its clearly low budget presentation and lack of long-term support, plus the apparently very low print run, all suggesting that maybe it did for them exactly what they wanted and expected. Yes, I feel the game deserved better, but I could see them already looking forward to the next Mario sports title in its place. If there's going to be a Mario and Sonic at the Olympics game title, it seems to be running quite late. The one for the sadly cancelled 2020 Olympics was released the prior November, but I could see this launching in the next few months nevertheless. Another obvious game in the sports line would be a new Mario Baseball, given that it's the last of the home console Mario sports titles that has yet to make it to Switch. But now we get into the really interesting titles. Nintendo Switch Sports did huge sales and didn't get any further DLC beyond the pre-planned schedule of sports announced at rollout. It seemed like a massive oversight not to have it on the base Switch, let alone on a sequel system. I can't see many of the ultra-casual fans of sports titles buying DLC, but they could simply re-release the game with extra content bolted on. The original, after all, was priced as a lower priced title but bundled with the leg strap, so they have the option to actually increase the price while keeping it within the normal range of Switch games as they re-release it, and its ultra-casual nature means it will likely continue to sell at a steady rate, even as the new console supersedes the Switch. After all, many of the people buying Switch Sports are unlikely to be early adopters of the next system. I think some kind of sequel, re-release, or other re-emergence of Switch Sports is one of the likeliest of the options on this list, but why jump the gun with a late-stage Switch re-release when they can make it a core evergreen title for their new console in its relatively early days? All things considered, I will put a new Switch Sports by the end of 2027 at a 30% shout. And then another game that seems to have died a death is Super Mario Maker 2. I fear that, like Splatoon 2, Nintendo probably don't want people to dwell too much on this title. Whether or not they make another one on the next console is up in the air. I really hope they do, but I can't say I'm entirely optimistic. If they don't, of course, this is one that would make a lot of sense to bring over to the new system. The game is, in large part, the creativity of the player base, and while it's understandable that the Wii U version, being on a very different console, couldn't be maintained indefinitely, perhaps the Switch version will fit in more easily with the sequel system. The long-held mystery of the plural use of extra game styles on the menu could be finally addressed if they do a deluxe port and expand it out slightly, and there is precedent for this. EPD10 dodged the opportunity to do a new 2D Mario for the early years of the Switch when they made Super Mario Maker 2 in the first place, and instead they simply ported New Super Mario Bros. U. A port of Super Mario Maker 2 with a thin veneer of extra polish would not sell as well as Mario Maker 3, but it would at least keep the Mario Maker concept alive and breathing for another several years, awaiting fresh inspiration as to how to get back to the buzz that the title had around 2015. See also, in a similar category, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze on Switch as an example of how a port can help Nintendo keep an important franchise alive in the absence of a new game by using simply a relatively bare-bones port. My only hesitation in forecasting this one is how soon a Mario Maker 2 re-release might come. If they're using the old game as a basis and they're maintaining it all this time, is this incentive to release a port sooner to ameliorate those costs? I think there's a 30% chance of some kind of Mario Maker title before the end of 2028, and I think if one release is in this window, a version of 2 has slightly more chance than something brand new, but equally, given the game's quite iterative nature, they might be better off just rebranding it as a 3 anyway. More likely, I feel, is that Mario Maker 2 will be left to wither on the vine and will eventually be shunted out of the door when they're ready, perhaps late in the life of the next system after the team have put out a banner 2D title to finally launch Mario Maker 3 or hopefully Mario Maker 3D. Last but not least, we get to Super Mario Odyssey. It's such an iconic title, so close to the heart of the Switch that it seems impossible to believe it would not be reissued somehow. But for a new system, competing potentially with an all-new Mario title, I don't necessarily think they're going to want Super Mario Odyssey at the party. Of all the titles listed here, I think this does have the strongest call to be re-released on Switch, but the question is how? Almost unique among Nintendo's major evergreens from this era, it did not receive DLC. Even Mario Kart 8 Deluxe eventually got substantial DLC, while Luigi's Mansion 3 had Scarescraper. A very late in the day return to Odyssey would allow them to re-release the game as a special edition for Holiday 2024, but also promote DLC downloads into the bargain. However, I don't think either the physical edition or the digital downloads would be the point of this enterprise. The point would be engagement, keeping people on board the Nintendo digital infrastructure and particularly Nintendo Switch Online. These are annual deals, and many people will be reviewing around the anniversary of the Nintendo Switch Online whether or not they continue to be members of the service. Nintendo needs a big, persuasive pitch to get people to sign back up and stay signed up. And so instead of leaving their holiday period with one brand new major game, they could weaponize an old game like Odyssey by giving it a DLC pack free via the expansion pack, just as they did with Happy Home Designer and the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass. But would people not have already bought the game? My hunch is that they would brand it as a special Mario edition or a limited version. If I'm going to get really crazy with these forecasts, and this is a 10%er, but I think a good 10%er, what if they had Super Mario Odyssey go to a kingdom where he changes into the Super Mario movie version of himself? I don't think Nintendo has any interest in bringing the movie version of their titles into the games in any significant way, but Mario is a very experimental title, and in a world where he can already turn into 8-bit Mario, where he can already go behind the scenes of a cinema, the potential of doing a DLC for Odyssey that serves as a victory lap not just for the game, but also for the movie, might be tempting. It wouldn't even have to be a whole game. Perhaps it's just another case where Mario pops behind that movie screen and the sprite changes, but it feels like the sort of thing that would gain maximum attention for a relatively small input. As I say, I'm giving a 10% chance of some kind of movie-themed element in Mario Odyssey DLC this year. It's unlikely, but far, I think, from impossible. All that said, whether it comes in the form of a special edition or not, I'd say there has to be a 30% chance of a Super Mario Odyssey re-release or reissue before the Switch goes away for good. If, as seems to be the case, the new system delay was not the original plan, this would also double as an easy and eye-catching title to get out of the door. Often in life, though, the simplest explanations are the best, and Occam's razor suggests that the cost versus benefit issue is the strongest explanation for Nintendo's decision to let these titles fall out of print, added to the fact that scarcity and the chance to re-release their older titles after a decade or so on a new system has always been a good strategy for Nintendo historically. Still, if you can see other methods in Nintendo's apparent madness, be sure to pop a comment below and then click on one of these links for more Nintendo forecasts. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again soon.